I actually wasn't born in Walpole, but came to Walpole 1979 when I met my wife and we purchased a home. We happened to purchase a home on Plimpton Street in Walpole, and it was a home owned by the Plimptonville Trust, and Calvin Hastings Plimpton was the owner of the trust and the manager. So we happened to not meet him at that time because he was in New York at the time in his medical practice. But I'd like to take the time to tell you about the story and along the saga of meeting Calvin Plimpton and coming to Plimptonville. Plimptonville is kind of a unique place. We have barns, old farms, massive farms. We have a castle. We have the river coming by and the dam and hydropower, electric. And all that was intriguing at the time. And after our house was purchased, it had been rented for 40 years in the Plimpton Trust. And Calvin Plimpton also sold all the other houses subsequently in the next couple of years. And all of the residents started rehabbing, fixing the homes. We all got together and enjoyed some of the history of Plimptonville, which wasn't as well known, at least to me, as a new person to Plimpton. So we did, with Walpole Cable years ago, a Plimptonville walkabout, kind of a riding tour of all the old houses, and there were 13 houses in the Plimptonville estate, and along with the farm and the castle. The castle was never physically owned, but it's right in here, so it's part of the intrigue of Plimptonville. So as we did the Plimptonville tape, Calvin Plimpton, who at the time was living in Westwood, retired as a surgeon, caught hold of the tape and called me up and wanted to see it firsthand. He came over to the house, saw the tape, was very interested in it, as he's been interested in history for a long time of Plimptonville, and wanted to see the tape. So he came over and we saw it, and then because of what I found out about him and his background, he gave us permission to do a Plimptonville story of Calvin Hastings Plimpton and his life on the farm and in his medical career. So that was a 3-hour taping of all the stories that he told us, and I'm here today to kind of share those stories. He's since passed away at the age of 88 in 2007, but those stories shouldn't be lost. So Calvin Plimpton was born in 1919 on the Lewis Farm, which is right on the corner of East Street and Plimpton Street. The home was a large, expansive farm at the time, 4 huge barns, hundreds of milking cows, a piggery, all kinds of animals, sheep, alpacas, goats. I had a brook, and a lot of farm workers were in and out about the farm life. So George Arthur Plimpton, his father, was a very prominent citizen here in Walpole. Prior to what he was doing in his publishing business, he happened to donate land to the town forest, right by where the high school was built, and we now have a school named after George Arthur Plimpton. So we came from a very long history of people who lived in Plimptonville, somewhat about 200 years, when the iron works and the iron factories were right down the end of Plimpton Street. So he has some stories from his father about the beginnings of the industrial age here in Plimpton and the development of the railroad and all how their family has grown up here and impacted all of the goings about in Plimptonville. So the story starts with Calvin himself living on the farm as a young boy, enjoying the farm life, not having a lot of farm responsibilities. His father was running the farm as a gentleman's farm, meaning that he didn't do any of the work of farming, but hired other people to run a traditional old farm on the 200 acres. Calvin Plimpton grew up here, loved it, being able to be outdoors, His childhood friend was Joe Welsh Jr., whose father was the famous lawyer in the McCarthy hearings in Boston, and tells us stories of growing up on the farm, hanging out in a log cabin next to the castle. His other friend was Adlai Stevenson, who, as we know, ran for vice president of the country at the time. So Calvin talked about his father traveling, being able to ride horses, shoot, go hunting, go fishing, play tennis on the tennis courts next door, and living an idyllic life now that their family has been moved over to the farm. Calvin was very interested in education along with the family. He went to Andover Exeter Academy as a young boy, had French tutors in the family farm. Later on, he talked about the story of whether we would go to Amherst College or not. And I didn't know the impact of Amherst College, but he tells me later, he said, my father was on the board of trustees and it was pretty prominent in education, publishing and textbooks and what have you, and traveling all around. So he had a world-class education before he even hit college. But he wasn't sure he wanted to go to Amherst College. And then he was telling us that 30 of his family members had all attended Amherst College in terms of their academic life. So he still wasn't on the fence. His father invited an English professor down to kind of coax him into going, and then out in the family pool, swam laps underneath the pool, and Calvin was intrigued by his athletic vigor and liked him a lot and wanted to join him out at Amherst College. So he went to Amherst College, got his bachelor's education, and then wanted to be a biochemist and enrolled in Harvard University graduate school. Went later on to do some medical training, and then just at the time medical training was going to be what he was interested in. The Coconut Grove fire happened in Boston, and he happened to be working in one of the hospitals at the time in medical care, and he was coaxed and kind of almost forced, as he called it, into surgery on severely burned people who have had, who were part of the Coconut Grove disaster. And that kind of started some of his medical career. He goes back to tell us a little bit earlier that his medical interest started when the chickens running around the farm would be choking on some of the grass and things they ate. So he was told by one of the farm hands how to slit the chickens' throats and stitch them up and patch them up. So he had some little surgical experience. So lo and behold, he's in the midst of a year-long work in the fire epidemic here in the Coconut Grove situation. Goes off to join the Army in 1943, and since he had medical surgical experience, he was a captain in the Army, and furthered his surgical training there in the military. Upon leaving the military, he came back to Walpole briefly, and at one of the gatherings at the homestead, which is the largest house in Norfolk County at the time, his family owned it, met his wife, his wife Ruth Talbert, at a family gathering, who he tells me was a second cousin once removed. I'm not sure what the once removed is, but in any event, he was laughing about it, and he was married to her for his whole entire life. And she was a staunch supporter of Calvin and all his decisions and influence in his career. He got an offer for working at Columbia University in downtown Medical Center in New York. Went down there as a surgeon, worked his way up in the surgical department to become the head of surgery for 20 years. Get a little tired and bored with the surgery, living in Riverdale, New York, and the swanky New York City house. Was looking for a little change, and at the time, the presidency of Amherst College was offered to him by several alumni, and he was encouraged to attend. And he and Ruthie went back and forth. Should I take it? Should I not? Should I go continue my medical career here? Can I get back in the medical career after I finished with the university? He spent a decade in the university. During its probably most tumultuous time was from 60 to 71 or 2. When we had protests, we had all kinds of upheavals on university campuses, and he happened to be in charge of Amherst College out here in Amherst, Massachusetts, dealing with the war conflicts and the protests, and what do we do with the students, and how do we deal with them not going to class and protesting. They had several walk councils out there of significant Washington figures. McNamara came out to talk and to be part of that discussion. The other famous figure that Calvin introduced and had a lot of work with during his time at the university was Robert Frost. So we talked about enjoying his style of poetry and his contributions to the educational literature. So the final decision was that he was going to take the professorship, and he was the president for a decade and enjoyed it immensely, but then decided to go back to medical practice, got his terminal degree from Columbia University, and went on to practice surgical medicine at downtown medical center in New York until the end of his career. Meanwhile, making sporadic trips back and forth here to the Lewis farm and growing up on it. He said it was the fondest memories he ever had. He talks about being able to go out and play golf at the Walpole Country Club. Now, the Walpole Country Club at that time, he was telling me, was an 18-hole golf course, and along with his clubs, he would always take a shotgun because there were foxes out around the woods here in Walpole, and it was nothing more fun than hitting a golf ball and shooting some of the foxes. Give an example of how rural Walpole was at the time when he was growing up. He had a strong connection to Walpole, mainly the history of Walpole and Plimptonville, oftentimes because of Isaac Newton Lewis, who was one of the first major historians here in Walpole, and he built the castle, and he talks about it in glowing terms, but also talks about it that the Lewis Castle was the Lewis Castle and was off limits to any of the Plimptons. So he had never been inside the castle, and I haven't either, but in any event, it's a wonderful building here, not known to many people, but he always enjoyed the history and reading about it and discovering it. So we got intrigued by the walkabout we did, and after that we had a chance to go visit him in his house over in Westwood, and he's retired, and he said every once in a while I sneak by, and I love to see the people from Plimptonville and lived in those houses and being part of their life. He knew them all personally, and for the times that he owned and managed the property, he never changed any of the rent for people. Did what he could to the properties, but eventually come to the point where he sold the 13 Plimpton houses, and that's when I came into the picture to meet him. He was obviously a well-educated, well-traveled gentleman. After his medical career, he was still interested in education and reading and writing. He became president of Beirut University, and he talked about, he said it was, I don't know why I did this, he tells me, but he was very shaky about going over there because the last president was killed and the current president was was kidnapped and had a bodyguard. So it was kind of a tumultuous Middle Eastern time over there. But he went on for a number of years and was the president of Beirut University, supporting the educational process overseas. One of the things he was identified most proud of was that in the 1970s he introduced and made Amherst College a co-ed university at the time, which he thought was groundbreaking. He was also involved in Barnard University, which was a female-based university, and he gave a lot of financial support to the university. So the Plimptons seemed to be extremely well off. Calvin, to help with the presentation, sent me out to Amherst College and, assigns me a archivist to help review all the data and the facts and information he had out there. And I go out there and I find that, there's a Plimpton building, there's a Plimpton dormitory, there's a Plimpton Fields, there's a 10 or 15 foot portrait of Calvin Plimpton there in Amherst College, and I was really impressed with all of his impact. Although keeping a very low, kind of humble profile, Calvin was always enjoying engaging with people about Plimptonville and his time in Plimptonville. His son actually has gone to many of our Plimptonville walkabouts and reunions. He was also an Amherst College graduate, is practicing psychology out in Amherst. Part of the fact that Calvin was also able to capture all of the history from his father, who was a great kind of a spellbinder, as he says. But his father actually was not pleased with all the politics going on in Walpole, and talked about he wanted at some point to secede from the town and create his own town of Plimptonville. Now, if you look on the maps, Plimptonville is still identified as not a town, but a section of Walpole identified in the maps. But he said we had a lot of impact back in the day and currently. But to facilitate leaving Walpole, he said his father built a hydroelectric plant on the dam down there on the Neponset River to at someday hopefully break away from Walpole, but that never happened. But he had lots of good stories to talk about being in Plimptonville, enjoyed being here, took a liking to me. I happen to have the same name as his father. I happen to be a psychologist, so all those things connected, and he's been in touch with me over the years until he passed away. Hopefully you'll get a glimpse of what he and his wife and his lifestyle was like here in Plimptonville. He grew up right on the farm here, and was very enjoyable to get to know him. While he was at his house one day, the phone rings, he picks it up, and he was speaking fluent French to somebody. So he was a kind of a world figure for Walpole here, growing up on the farm in Plimptonville. So hopefully you get a glimpse of what he was like and a little bit of what Plimptonville was like years ago. Thank you.